Welcome to a new video of Mythos at Midnight, where tonight we will be discussing the second of several Persian legends, that being the Persian King Jamshid. Remember to like, subscribe, and comment which other legends you would like us to make a video about. Let's dive in. They say Jamshid divided his people into four parts: priests, warriors, farmers, and artisans. For the first time, society moved in harmony like a living cosmos, each part sustaining the other. It seemed a perfect design, a balance that promised no end. Yet tonight, we meet a king who built that perfect order, and the whisper that would one day unmake it. Why does brilliance always carry its own quiet crack? And one of his days would become our new year. How that happened waits further in the tale. First, come closer to the light that surrounded the king himself. Imagine a king described as if he carried daylight within him, whose very presence could calm quarrels and soften storms within human hearts. In the sacred texts, he appears as Yima Kshaita, and the radiance surrounding him was called Far or Khoreh, though later stories often use the name Khoreh. This radiance was not just a glow. It was the mark of divine favor, the sign that his rule was bound to cosmic order, not only to earthly strength. When this light was with him, peace flowed like water, and people recognized his authority without question. His throne shone because he himself was said to shine. The stories say this radiance was never his to own outright. It was given as a trust, a fragile gift that could also be withdrawn. Like sunlight on still water, beautiful but easily disturbed, Khoreh remained only with a ruler who stayed aligned with truth and balance. Should arrogance or falsehood grow, the light would depart, leaving the king no more than an ordinary man. Jamshid lived under that condition from the first moment of his reign, standing at once in blessing and in danger of its loss. One account speaks of Ahura Mazda, Lord of Wisdom in the Zoroastrian tradition, offering Jamshid an extraordinary choice. He could receive visions of prophecy, to see beyond ordinary time, to know what was hidden ahead in fate. Most would be unable to resist. Yet Jamshid refused. He turned from the gift of seeing into destiny and instead asked to shape daily life itself. He wanted to strengthen the earth, to ease human struggles, to build a world where people could live well. That choice marked a fork in his path. It was a human decision, practical, and perhaps the first hint of the tension that later stories would not forget. Without prophecy to prove his right, Jamshid set his rule upon progress and safety. He chose to lead not by visions in fire or revelation from heaven, but by improving the lives of his people in visible ways. It was unusual in ancient tales, where most rulers claimed divine signs to mark themselves apart. Jamshid instead sought to serve through innovation and care, weaving a sense of prosperity that rested on daily life rather than distant omens. The result, the stories say, was harmony that spread without need of weapons. Communities once divided laid aside their quarrels. Families set aside arguments and turned toward support. Even regions long troubled by strife entered a kind of stillness. People felt guarded not only by walls or soldiers, but by the radiance that seemed to glow through their king. It was a peace that reached as deeply as trust. Pause for a moment and wonder. What kind of light could hold so many hearts steady? Was it a fire that truly descended from above, or a collective faith that no one wished to break? The myths suggest both, tying his aura to divine power, but also to the human willingness to believe in his role. When mountain fires were lit at night, whispers must have carried the thought, that their king's light moved with them, holding away the edges of darkness. Yet already, tucked inside the myth, is the question of endurance. Could that light last, or was it bound to flicker when human pride pressed against it? To the people who lived under his rule, there seemed no shadow at all. His reign stretched forward like an endless road. They believed they had entered not a brief moment of fortune, but a true golden age, and it shimmered with a character different than conquest or kingship by bloodline. The age was remembered as one of security, comfort, and balance, anchored by the radiance that touched Jamshid. Still, the stories speak with careful balance. From afar, his image glows with awe, yet the edges never let us forget that light casts its own shadows. Khoreh was fragile. It could not abide arrogance. Behind their prosperity, the people lived in unspoken dependence on a force neither they nor their king could hold if it began to slip away. In these tales, his reign begins as dawn begins, calm, steady, filled with promise of a day without unrest. But dawn, however radiant, cannot stand still. Like time itself, light must change, carrying with it a reminder that no perfection withstands forever. Imagine now that first glow, strong enough to silence discord and quiet fear, bathing the land in peace. Hold the picture of a king crowned not only by gold, but by the radiance of far. It was the beginning of an age when sorrow seemed absent, when the people thought they had stepped into a season without pain or end. And it is here, with that glow surrounding life, that we follow the tale into what came next. What do the old stories tell us of such a time? They speak of Jamshid's brightest years as an age without sorrow, when the weight of suffering seemed to vanish. Both the Zoroastrian scriptures, in texts like the Vendidad and the Yashts, and later epic poetry such as Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, describe this astonishing vision. It was more than prosperity, more than human strength. It was remembered as a world where no pain lingered, no disease struck, and no shadow seemed to reach into daily life. Imagine waking each morning without the old fear of loss. No sickness spread through homes. No weary lines aged the faces of parents and grandparents. Fields and orchards gave food as if the earth itself had sworn never to withhold. Roads stretched open, safe for travelers who carried stories instead of weapons. These three blessings, youth unbroken, abundance of food, and safety of journey, became the rhythm of ordinary life. And with that rhythm, fragility itself slipped from memory. People grew used to this ease. They no longer asked, "What keeps us safe?" They only trusted safety itself. A man could work his trade well into old age, hands steady as when he was young. A woman could move freely without the aches that usually wear away her elder's strength. Children grew with confidence that seemed to have no limit, grounded not in chance but in the endless cycle of plenty. Time felt softer, its passing hidden, as though the years themselves had slowed and set themselves aside. But what happens when a people stop remembering risk? The land, too, seemed to widen under this blessing. Borders once watched with suspicion no longer needed guarding. Villages grew into towns. Towns swelled into centers of trade without fear that travelers would bring war at their heels. Armies all but dissolved into symbols, soldiers walking as keepers of peace more than fighters of battles. Enemies found little room to thrive in neighboring lands when the prosperity of Jamshid's kingdom seemed to pour outward like water. Picture the hearth fires of those days, families telling children that sorrow itself had gone into hiding. Priests could trust the heavens to remain steady. Farmers turned soil, confident of a harvest that would not fail. Craftsmen shaped what was beautiful, certain their hands would never falter. Even warriors, so long tied to the edge of the blade, laid aside hunger for battle. Their weapons became reminders of order more than instruments of destruction. A sword on the wall was no longer feared. Instead, it stood for a harmony few had thought possible. The myths insist on this image with striking care. Jamshid's rule, they say, was more than political command. It was as though divine and human order had finally matched. Heaven's balance found its mirror below. Bodies and spirits, freed from their usual burdens, lived in calm alignment. The story carries not only what people believed Jamshid created, but what they longed for most deeply. A life untouched by suffering, a paradise not hidden beyond the world, but placed gently inside it. Still, the stories do not leave us without unease. They ask quiet questions. If age is unseen, how will children understand that life still moves forward? If harvests never fail, who will remember storms? If sorrow hides too long, how will a people recognize joy when it arrives? The myths whisper that forgetting fragility is its own weakness. Safety without limits tempts life to drift into certainty until people can no longer imagine change. And when change does arrive, it strikes harder precisely because they have forgotten its touch. Time within this golden season pressed new weight upon Jamshid himself. As ease spread wider, people came to look upon their king not simply as the giver of blessings, but as the guardian of perfection. Their gratitude edged toward expectation. The age itself became a promise, one that demanded to be kept without end. Here lies the paradox hidden inside plenty. The better a world becomes, the more fragile it grows, for its people will accept nothing less than its perfection. Think of it as the height of dawn, sunlight resting everywhere, though noon's shadows wait just ahead. Jamshid's golden age shone with unmatched beauty, but a flame becomes heavy when it must never fade. With each season of abundance, with each year without sorrow, the burden upon Jamshid grew. He stood not just as a king, but as the single pillar carrying the world the people thought would last forever. The tale pauses here, with a kingdom glowing in balance, its people convinced that paradise had been secured. Their days stretched boldly, assured by trust in a king who seemed chosen, their lives unfolding in harmony that asked no questions. Out of that prosperity, Jamshid looked beyond the gifts already given. His gaze turned toward shaping the very form of society itself, in a way meant to endure longer than comfort or harvest. Jamshid's boldest step was not won through armies or conquest. It was quieter, set into the life of every household, and shaped to last longer than any battle could. He divided his people as though arranging stars across the night sky, each placed with intention, each with its own role within the vast order of his kingdom. In doing so, he carried the belief that the world on earth could mirror the harmony above in the heavens. His kingdom became more than a realm of power. It became a living pattern of cosmic balance, a map drawn across human lives. The division was told in 4 parts. The Athornans, or priests, were named first, keepers of wisdom and the voices of prayer, guiding the people in sacred matters. The Rathashtars, or warriors, were named second, not as conquerors, but as protectors of peace within the realm. The Vastriosh, or farmers, formed the third, their patient hands shaping the soil and feeding every home. The Hutaoksh, or artisans, were the fourth, giving form to tools, clothing, shelters, and all the crafted works that elevated existence beyond mere survival. Each group reflected an element of creation, meant to work in balance like fire, water, earth, and air. At first, the structure appeared generous and clear. It removed uncertainty, leaving no family adrift between roles. Every household knew its place, its duties, and its contribution to the whole. Priests raised their chants upon mountaintops, fires glowing beside them. Warriors kept watch at the borders, quiet but steady in their defense. Farmers laid seed into the fields, certain the earth would answer with grain and fruit. Artisans bent metal, carved stone, shaped wood, and filled the markets with goods that comforted life. To many, this order felt as natural as breathing, steady as the rhythm of the seasons. But even gifts carry edges. A system that fixes roles so firmly risks drawing lines too sharp to cross. Priests seemed higher than artisans, the sword of a warrior heavier than the plow of a farmer. Though each group was honored in its own way, ranking was quietly suggested by the very act of division. Over generations, lines deepened. A child born to farmers inherited fields. A child of artisans was taught the craft of their household. Skills passed not only through training, but through blood. The system was efficient, with each role refined across centuries. But efficiency can grow rigid, closing doors to change. If a child's gift belonged to another path, the weight of tradition made it difficult to step elsewhere. Societies thrive on order, yet order can silence voices that do not fit. If a child's talent doesn't match their birth role, who speaks for them? The mythic memory lingers on the vivid images of these groups at work. Priests chanting from the mountain sanctuaries, their voices lifted into the wind. Warriors circling the edges of the realm, less an instrument of violence than a living wall of vigilance. Farmers working the endless rows of grain, their hands the quiet pulse of the kingdom's survival. Artisans filling public squares with beauty and wood, bronze and cloth, each hammer strike and each weaving making visible the culture's care. Together they formed a system that seemed smooth, steady, and eternal, resting on the belief that their structure was not mere human invention, but a reflection of divine order itself. Living within this design meant more than social identity. For those inside it, the fourfold pattern was a mirror of heaven. To take one's place as priest, warrior, farmer, or artisan was to live in tune with the pattern of creation. Jamshid's reign held the promise that ordinary lives were in step with the larger harmony of the cosmos. People believed that such balance was the reason their world prospered, a reason that could outlast the changing tides of fortune. To them, it was difficult to imagine their society breaking apart so long as this order endured. Yet myth often carries a quiet warning. The same divisions that brought clarity and progress also exposed their strain. Freedom shrinks when roles turn to cages, when each person's path is traced before birth. The design that looked flawless on the outside revealed its fractures in moments of individuality. A son who longed to build rather than farm. A daughter whose wisdom surpassed ritual, yet could not rise beyond the destiny of her lineage. Such questions rarely showed in the open during Jamshid's days, but the stories hint that these small cracks never vanish. They lie beneath the surface, waiting. In Jamshid's time, the divisions were embraced as the foundation of stability. Communities flourished, cities expanded, and generations wrapped themselves in the fourfold framework, as though it were part of creation itself. The priest's sacred chants, the warrior's silent watch, the farmer's harvest, and the artisan's craft seemed locked in eternal rhythm. No matter how deep the questions of hierarchy or freedom might whisper, the people believed their way of life was more than human order. They believed it carried the blessing of the divine. So the kingdom stood, precise, luminous, and certain of itself, upheld by a ruler whose power was as much design as command. It seemed to his people that this order would outlast every storm, that their lives within it had been placed exactly where they were meant to be. Yet Jamshid himself, even while preserving this structure, did not stop at the framework of society. His vision stretched beyond the scaffolding of roles, reaching into the very fabric of human possibility. What if the crafts and skills of civilization could be traced to a single hand? What if progress itself could be placed within the keeping of one king? In the stories of Persia, Jamshid is remembered not only as the king of light and order, but as the monarch of inventions, the one through whom the gifts of civilization found their first form. These myths speak of a world still raw, where homes were fragile, where rivers cut boundaries that few could cross, and where the earth held treasures no hand had yet brought to the surface. Into such a world, Jamshid offered knowledge that reshaped daily life. Each innovation was remembered as if it came from the well of his reign, handed to humanity through his guidance. The first of these gifts was permanence in living. Where huts of clay or wood once gave little protection, the story says Jamshid taught people the art of shaping and firing bricks. Walls grew taller, roofs grew sturdier, homes could survive storms instead of crumbling under them. For the first time, cities rose with outlines meant to last. Their patterns formed not from accident, but design. Brick by brick, people learned that their efforts could extend into the future, leaving marks that outlived their builders. The enduring structures stood as a memory of his reign itself, dwellings that refused to vanish with the rains. Movement came next. With boats, people gained a way to cross rivers or sail along the edges of seas. Wooden hulls carried them where feet alone could not go. What had once been boundaries became pathways. Villages touched new lands. Merchants exchanged goods and words. Travelers returned with stories of distance, giving their people horizons wider than their home fields. The boat, in these old tales, did not only change trade or travel, it shifted imagination. It taught people that what lay beyond the water was not unreachable. Doors opened because one king was said to have guided hands to craft vessels strong enough to carry them across. From the depths of the sea came beauty. The myths say Jamshid revealed how to draw pearls from their shells, treasures hidden from the eyes of earthbound life. Imagine divers plunging below water, returning with spheres of soft light in their hands. These were set into jewelry, offered as symbols of wealth, and treasured as gifts between families. Their glow tied land to sea, ordinary living to something rare and mysterious. Pearls carried both luxury and wonder, stirring pride and ceremony. They reminded people that nature held secrets waiting to be drawn upward, if someone had the knowledge to show the way. Fire and ore offered another path. Jamshid was remembered as the one who gave the secret of metal. In fire, stone softened. In hammer, it yielded. Copper, bronze, and iron turned into plows, ornaments, and weapons. The farmer's share of this gift was strength. Fields opened more swiftly beneath sharp plowshares. Harvests reached further than before. But the warrior's share was darker. Swords and spears cut with more finality than stone or wood. Ever had, in one innovation, both nourishment and destruction lived side by side. To work with metal meant holding both creation and violence in the same hand. And in that balance, the myths suggest, lay the first whisper of danger. Beyond shelter, travel, sea treasures, and metal, Jamshid's name was tied to medicine, music, art, even the refining of rituals. gardens planted more carefully, instruments sang more clearly, no longer fragile but durable, their sounds bright across markets and courtyards. Human life began to shift from survival into cultivation, from the crude into forms of refinement that seemed unshakable. Each step elevated existence, each shaped by the myths into the act of a single ruler. One story, often told with a sense of wonder, is the legend of wine's discovery. Grapes were already known, but what happened when their juice was left forgotten in sealed jars seemed at first like poison. The liquid soured, bubbles rose, and it was feared. In the legend, however, its hidden value was revealed, not as harm, but as remedy. A troubled man drank it in despair, only to find his pain softened, his sleep eased. Slowly, it was reimagined as medicine, then as gift, and finally as art within ritual. Vineyards became places of gathering. The drink itself, once dismissed, was woven into ceremony and song. By naming this tale as legend, the storytellers preserve its charm while hinting that its truth lies in the symbolic more than the literal. All of these accounts build toward one image: Jamshid as the king whose reign reached into the smallest tools and the widest changes. He gave people homes more lasting, ways to journey beyond their valleys, wealth born from the sea, iron-shaped both for field and battlefield, and even the rituals that softened suffering or turned celebration into tradition. Under him, life rose from the simple into the woven fabric we call civilization. He was not remembered only as one who guarded peace, but as one who fashioned progress itself. Yet the myths speak with sober clarity. Every tool carries a shadow. A wall can protect or divide. A boat can carry trade or invasion. A pearl can adorn or awaken envy. A plow can feed life, or a sword wielded beside it can end it. Each invention carried blessing and risk folded together, waiting upon the choices of those who held them. The stories linger especially on the image of metal, the plowshare and the sword, as the simplest way to remind us that no gift arrives without its hidden edge. In all this, Jamshid's figure grew beyond that of a mortal ruler. He was not remembered only in battle or decree, but in the everyday objects of life. People saw bricks in their city walls and thought of him. They crossed water and felt his wisdom beneath the oars. They touched jewelry and repeated his name into memory. They passed a jug of wine at the table and whispered of the king who first unveiled it. His presence endured not as a distant monarch, but as the origin of their daily world. This shift was both his greatness and his looming risk. For once, progress appears to come from a single hand. That hand is no longer judged only by law or justice. It becomes the source through which the people measure their lives. In time, their image of Jamshid grew vast, carrying not only his brilliance, but also their hungry expectation. And as his people grew secure through these gifts, Jamshid himself began to be judged by them, another quiet danger. Imagine looking into a vessel so clear and calm that the surface did not only reflect your face, but also the shape of yesterday and the outline of tomorrow. This was the Jamshid, the cup of Jamshid, spoken of in the legends with reverence. It was no simple cup, but a symbol of knowledge hidden from ordinary eyes. To hold it was to peer into truth itself, to see the stars as if they were written on water, to glimpse the movement of time folding forward and back. Later, Persian poets would take up this image again, using the cup as a symbol of omniscience, a mirror of divine insight fitted into human hands. Through the shining surface, Jamshid was said to trace the cycles of the heavens, the slow motion of Saturn, the rise of Venus, the returning path of the sun. All of these patterns appeared within the still reflection. To his people, the cup was not a treasure of wealth, but of alignment, binding earth to sky. A king fought wars to defend borders or enforced laws to guard lives. But Jamshid was remembered for guiding his kingdom through something quieter, a sense that his decisions echoed what the cosmos itself was already writing. But with such vision comes caution. A monarch who peers too far into what lies ahead risks forgetting the limits of human sight. The stories leave this reminder gently. Knowledge of destiny can inspire, but it also tempts pride. Jamshid's cup was remembered not as a danger in itself, but as a fragile threshold. Any ruler who leaned too heavily upon it might begin to think he walked among the gods rather than mortals. Was it gift, or was it temptation? The myths leave that question unanswered, allowing it to rest softly in the listener's mind. Guiding him in this mystery was Sarosh Yazad, a divine presence of obedience and balance. Sarosh did not appear as companion of the flesh, but as the whisper of protection, urging kings to heed warnings and to remain true to order. In the stories, Sarosh not only aided Jamshid in interpreting the cup's visions, but also carried cautions, such as the warning of building a vara, a shelter for protection against disaster. This figure gave meaning to what Jamshid saw, bringing both intuition and restraint so that visions did not overwhelm human judgment. Without that voice, seeing would have been no different from blindness. The tales connect these symbols with other objects and practices from his reign. The Kasti belt, a ritual cord worn at the waist, bound a person to purity and truth. It was a daily reminder that strength rested not only in arms or in wealth, but in right alignment with order. In Jamshid's world, the belt became more than ritual clothing. It was memory in fabric, a small circle tying each life to cosmic law, as steady as the stars holding their paths overhead. Other stories speak of observatories, high places where sages and priests lifted their eyes to follow the night sky. From such towers, the rhythm of sun and moon was traced and carefully recorded. Rituals below on the earth aligned with those celestial patterns, so that festivals and prayers moved in step with the heavens. In Jamshid's time, to watch the stars was no idle pastime. It was political, sacred, and vital. By knowing the sky, the kingdom moved with rhythm rather than accident. Every fire lit, and every chant spoken in harmony with the greater motions above. Seen together, the cup, the voice of Sarosh Yazad, the belt of purity, the towers that stretched toward the heavens, they created one image of kingship. Jamshid ruled not through conquest or bloodline alone, but through knowledge, an awareness that his reign joined the visible world with the unseen order of creation. To his people, this was not belief in a far-off heaven, but a felt presence moving through their lives. They trusted that balance itself breathed through their king, and yet the warning edge remains. Any ruler who stands too close to the mysteries of the divine risks stepping further than mortals are meant to go. The stories say it gently, but firmly. To see too much is to invite the loss of humility. Pride can creep into wisdom. A king certain of the stars' secrets may begin to act as though his own will is the same as heaven's. In this sense, danger was not contained in the cup or in the stars. It lay in the heart of the man who claimed to read them. Still, for a time, the balance was steady. The people saw not only invention in their walls, plows, and vessels, but also purpose in their prayers. Fires were lit in rhythm with constellations. Belts were tied with meaning. Rituals moved in step with sun and moon. The kingdom's harmony did not rest only in bread and brick, but in trust that their existence was stitched together with the heavens themselves. Life felt safe because it was sacred, daily tasks carried out under patterns no human could disturb. These stories remember Jamshid as both builder and seer, weaving mortal skill together with glimpses of timeless order. Few rulers are remembered this way, not only as those who secured lands or guided armies, but as those who seemed to align human life with the very chart of stars. It is this image of Jamshid that has remained most enduring, a man whose reign felt like a mirror of the cosmos, whose hands seemed to uphold not only a throne, but a greater balance. And within that harmony, a new rhythm entered the world. Out of his vision came not just invention or division, not just rituals tied to the heavens, but a celebration that marked the cycle of renewal. It was said to have begun during the height of his reign, glowing with the same brilliance as the stars that moved above him. What vision could shape a festival that still returns every spring? What moment of recognition could create a celebration lasting thousands of years? The tales point us next toward its origin, remembered as the birth of Nowruz. It is said that the first Nowruz rose from the moment when Jamshid's reign aligned with the turning of spring. In some accounts of the Zoroastrian tradition and in Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, his coronation came to mark the very first day of Farvardin, a day some calendars still call Jamshed-i Nowruz. What might have been only the crowning of a king became something greater, tied to light returning, the earth awakening, and the hope of renewal re-entering human life. The people remembered that day not simply as the rise of a monarch, but as a cycle set in motion. To them, Jamshid did not only rule, he embodied the same force that stirred seeds underground and called rivers back to life after winter's stillness. The festival was born from this union, crown with creation, human order with the rhythm of the season. Each year, as the March sun tilted back toward warmth, the people repeated the cycle, not simply to honor a memory, but to participate in the act of renewal itself. Imagine families gathering as that first cycle was remembered. They prepared in anticipation, washed their garments, swept their homes, and welcomed the king who seemed to carry radiance like the returning sun. Jamshid sat upon his throne, the symbol of Khoreh shining above him, while the land itself echoed his ascent. Just as buds trembled to open on the trees, people saw renewal in the king. His reign and the coming of spring were braided into one image, each giving strength to the other. In this way, Nowruz was not only a festival, it became a mirror, where human life and the seasons spoke the same language. The joy of Nowruz found its expression shown in symbols both simple and profound. Among them was the haft scene, the table laid with 7 items beginning with the letter S in Persian. Each stood as more than food, each was a sign. Sabza, sprouted greens, meant rebirth. Seer, garlic, strength and health. Seb, the apple, stood for beauty and vitality. Senjed, the silverberry, recalled patience and love. Samanu, a sweet pudding, meant abundance. Serke, vinegar, reminded them of endurance through time. And Somak, the red spice, called to mind the sun's first light at dawn. Set together, these objects gave shape to hope, practical and sacred, woven into a single gesture of renewal. Picture the table lit by candle flames, casting steady circles of light into the twilight. Hands arranged the items carefully, children watching with quiet fascination, learning that each small symbol carried within it a part of the world's balance. Families leaned close to the table not only for beauty, but to rehearse the story of beginnings. Just as the year reawakened, so too did their own lives. In every apple placed, in each sprouting grain of green, was a promise that life continues forward, that endings are only pauses before return. The festival was filled with sound. Music carried on the air, strings plucked, drums murmuring a rhythm older than memory. People ate together, shared wine drawn back to Jamshid's name and the legend of its discovery. Even this drink held a double weight. Reminder of sweetness, reminder of fragility. Small cups lifted in celebration, also guarded against silence and sorrow. Every action, from lighting fire to breaking bread, was marked as both an offering and a protection, a way to strengthen the circle of joy against whatever lingered outside it. At the heart of Nowruz was a vision of equality that reached beyond the usual boundaries of power. On this day, the lines between priest and farmer, warrior and artisan softened. All gathered around the same fire, the same table, and shared the same renewal. The presence of the king did not disturb this balance, but confirmed it. Even Jamshid, radiant upon his throne, was part of the same cycle as the smallest seed, pushing upward through the soil. The festival reminded everyone that in rebirth, differences fell away. All were bound together in the same turning of the seasons, the same fragile but enduring hope. Yet the myths add a quieter note. Order and celebration always carried their opposite close by. In the stories, Ahriman, spirit of darkness and discord, waited just beyond the light. His role was not to crash into the gathering openly, but to hover at its edge, threatening to bend laughter toward quarrel, or to send smoke into fire's bright flame. This is why Nowruz was never only joy. It was also act of watchfulness. Every fire lit, every symbol placed, resisted disorder by setting harmony firmly in its place. Nowruz then held two layers at once. Outwardly, it was song, food, renewal, and laughter, the human heart rejoicing with the spring. Inwardly, it carried vigilance, a ritual strengthening against the pull of chaos. Each year the people repeated it, not only because the cycle of seasons demanded joy, but because balance among people demanded protection. The endurance of the festival rested not only on joy itself, but on the need to guard joy carefully, to hold it steady against what pressed outside its circle. This dual truth gave Nowruz its power. It told people that renewal was their right, but that it came with responsibility. They celebrated knowing that each flame on the table was also a shield. Each taste of sweetness was also a vow to continue. In the mingling of joy and defense, the festival became not just a holiday, but a rhythm, a way of living carried forward across centuries. And so Nowruz was remembered not merely as a commemoration of one king's coronation, but as a living cycle where order and renewal were renewed again and again. Elders repeated the story to children, families decorated their tables, and year after year, the promise was rehearsed. Spring's return, and the strength to stand against its undoing. The people held on to this knowledge, that where light flourishes, shadow will always linger close. For a time, Jamshid's glory was brightest here, tied to the birth of this great festival of light, fire, and renewal. But even as they celebrated, a shadow waited outside the circle of firelight. In the myths, the figure who stands opposite to all that Jamshid built is called Ahriman. He is remembered in Persian tradition as the spirit of chaos, the force that unsettles balance and resists the order of creation. Where Jamshid's reign was described as light, renewal, and harmony, Ahriman embodied the opposite: corrosion, deception, and unrest. His presence was not always shown in violent storms or crashing battles. Instead, he was imagined as the slow whisper at the edges, the subtle undoing that could transform joy into quarrel and ease into suspicion. During the celebrations of Nowruz, when firelight danced upon the tables and music carried into the night, the stories say Ahriman watched quietly. He searched not for gates left open, but for frailties in the human heart. Impatience, envy, forgetfulness. A feast might begin with laughter, yet if a single word sowed discord, Ahriman was thought to be there, bending joy toward fracture. His danger was never that of sudden collapse, but of turning the smallest cracks into wide openings. That is why, even in moments brightest with ritual, the people moved with quiet awareness that delight needed protection. Legends added that the gods, mindful of this shadow, offered a form of defense woven directly into the rituals themselves. Among the objects arranged on the half-seen table was said to be a talisman, hidden in plain sight. It carried no jewel, no glitter to draw attention. Instead, its strength was quiet, folded within the ordinary appearance of herbs, fruit, or spice. To an untrained eye, it was indistinguishable, yet the stories insist that it carried divine power, holding Ahriman back as if by an unseen flame. Whether object or idea, the myth preserved it as a seal of protection, resting within every household that honored the spring festival. Because of this belief, the acts of Nowruz were never only celebration. They were also acts of resilience. Each candle lit, each dish placed, each prayer spoken became part of a shield. Alone, a talisman was fragile, but placed in the pattern of the table and strengthened by the community's intention, it blazed with meaning. Neighbors joined hands across the threshold of winter, and together their laughter itself became defense. In retelling the myth, one can almost see it. The tiny flame on each table, trembling but steady, standing as quiet resistance against the encroaching shadow. This dual purpose gives Nowruz its depth. It reminded every household that joy carries its own responsibility. The sounds of feast and music were filled with warmth, but beneath them flowed a second awareness, that harmony must be protected or risk being undone. By repeating the ritual year after year, families declared not only gratitude for renewal, but also vigilance against disruption. Celebration and defense had become inseparable, and in their connection lay the true endurance of the festival. Yet the myths turn carefully at this point. They remind us that Ahriman's threat from beyond the firelight was never the greatest risk. Rituals and talismans could guard the people from the outside press of chaos. Unity itself was proof against intrusion, but the stories whisper something more troubling, that the deeper danger came not from without, but from within. They say even the most luminous rulers are not exempt from fragility. Jamshid's Khoreh, his divine radiance, was entrusted to him as a gift, never as ownership. It shone brightly for as long as humility kept it steady. The community could set their tables, repeat their invocations, and keep watch against Ahriman's approach. Yet, if pride entered the heart of the king himself, no communal protection could hold it back. This shift did not arrive as battle or disaster. It began softly, almost invisibly, in words Jamshid himself spoke. When he looked upon the prosperity around him, the inventions, the abundance, the walls, the rituals, the very festival that carried his name into spring, a subtle root of pride began to grow. What had once been seen as gift began, in his own vision, to look like his possession. And pride, the stories quietly warn, was the one breach no talisman could seal. So the myth leads us from the delicate balance of celebration and defense into a deeper unraveling. The people still lit their fires and shared their tables, still believed each flame a shield against the shadow outside. But within the brilliance of their king, the light was shifting. Confidence grew too large, swelling until humility could no longer hold it. In this way, the greatest protection failed not through the strength of Ahriman, but through the weakened guard of the one who had once embodied order itself. This is where the story of Jamshid turns. The Golden Age, secure against outer threat, was broken by the voice of the king himself. It began not with the clash of an army or a storm that tore the land apart, but with pride spoken aloud. Jamshid demanded divine honors and claimed the blessings of his reign as the work of his own hand. In that moment, he placed himself above the order that had sustained him. For years, his crown had shone with the sacred light known as the Far, also called Khoreh or Khoreh, the radiance of legitimacy and divine favor. But when he treated borrowed light as his own possession, the Far departed. The stories describe its leaving with absolute finality. One breath it was there, binding his people's trust, and the next it was gone. The departure was not slow, not gentle. It slipped away like air from a flame, leaving his throne in cold shadow. Imagine the silence that followed. Citizens who had once seen him as the radiance of heaven now heard only the voice of a man. They understood the subtle but crucial truth. The light had been entrusted, never owned. When he demanded worship, he revealed his forgetfulness, and the heavenly favor no longer lingered at his side. At first, nothing seemed different. The throne still caught the sun. Walls still stood strong. Armies still filled the fields. But something beneath the surface had shifted. The certainty that once dissolved doubt was gone. The glow that had made soldiers obey before command and neighbors trust without question no longer moved through him. A king without Far was only a king in name. Rumors gathered in marketplaces, whispered at firesides. If the radiance had left, what guarded their prosperous world now? Had his inventions, his harvests, his festival of spring come only from him, or from the divine he had rejected? Slowly, suspicion began to coil through the people. Faith drained like water through cracks. The unraveling was quiet. Armies did not shatter overnight, nor did cities collapse in a single dawn. Instead, trust dissolved in stages. Captains hesitated to carry out his orders. Priests faltered over sacred words once spoken with confidence. Families who had once bowed in reverence began to wonder if their loyalty was owed to another who might yet carry the radiance. Even silence grew heavier, the silence of Sarosh Yazad, who, according to the myths, no longer whispered caution in Jamshid's ear. Picture him, then, walking through his own halls, robes intact but power hollow. The throne beneath him still gleamed, but it gave no warmth back. Crowds still gathered, yet their looks carried doubt instead of awe. Where radiance had once silenced quarrels, his presence now only stirred unease. He had become visible as he truly was, a solitary man stripped of the unseen gift that had bound his people together. This is the warning the myths preserve. Hubris does not merely bruise greatness, it empties it. When Jamshid believed what had been given was his own work, the very source of his achievements deserted him. His brilliance remained in memory, the invention of brick, the order of society, the festival of spring. But those achievements alone could not hold power. The Far had been the thread that tied them to legitimacy. Without it, every thread came loose. The myths stress the imbalance here. Pride in an ordinary life might sour a friendship or bend a promise. But pride in one lifted by divine light consumes the gift entire. Greatness borrowed must remain acknowledged as borrowed. Jamshid forgot that truth. His loss was not a punishment placed upon him from without, but a simple result. A king who steals credit from heaven cannot keep heaven's blessing. Exile followed. His armies no longer kept discipline, their motions frayed by doubt. Messengers returned with few companions by their side. He left his throne behind and wandered far into distant lands, carrying not radiance but its absence. His steps echoed with memory, yet memory offered no shelter. The brilliance of his inventions lived on, but detached from him, they only reminded the people that their prosperity no longer required his rule. Think of that wandering. A man who once embodied balance between earth and sky walked as an ordinary figure, restless and exposed. He looked upon fields heavy with harvest and knew they no longer bore his name. He heard songs of spring sung at the fires of Nowruz, but felt them passed down without his presence. Everything he had shaped endured, but in being severed from him, it confirmed his undoing more deeply. Exile is distance not only from land, but from meaning itself. What he had built in centuries unraveled in only a few years. Fields still grew, cities still stood, families still blessed the table at Nowruz. The gifts of progress did not vanish because his light departed. Instead, they endured as proof that his brilliance rested only on divine favor, never on himself alone. Without that favor, he was already erased from the rhythms he had taught his people to live by. The radiance that had seemed eternal slipped abruptly into memory. The myths insist this was the true fall, not battle, not famine, not conquest, but pride. Hubris disguised as strength until it consumed the very light that sustained him. In stripping himself of humility, Jamshid invited emptiness. He became a man haunted by what he had been, an exile carrying the memory of brilliance but no longer its glow. And from that emptiness, another presence waited. Nature does not leave a throne vacant or a broken balance unfilled. Here the stories pause to remind us. Once the light left, what would fill the quiet? The answer would come not in gentle order, but in terror, remembered across generations as the rise of a figure shaped not from radiance but from shadow. From Jamshid's fading steps in exile, another figure emerged to seize the crown. Into that emptied throne strode Zahak, remembered not with reverence but with dread. He was not guided by light or blessed by divine favor. The stories describe him as bound instead to shadow, cruelty, and corruption. Where Jamshid's reign had carried radiance, Zahak's body itself became a mirror of the darkness he would spread. Myths tell of two serpents that grew upon his shoulders, grotesque and restless, hungry for what only human lives could supply. He was no chosen ruler of balance, no guardian of heaven's order. Rather, Zahak is remembered as a usurper who forced his way to power by destruction and manipulation. Where Jamshid had sought harmony, Zahak unstitched it with violence. His rise carried none of the subtle care or visions of a blessed monarch. Instead, it came through striking fear, ensuring obedience through terror. Families that once flourished now lived quietly under threat. Their days measured less by hope than by survival. Jamshid in exile had dwindled into a wandering figure, moving from land to land, with no army, no sacred radiance, and no promise of return. He became a name more than a person, remembered with sorrow while he still walked. His people's confidence was gone, and where there is no unity, fear finds its way in. Into that fracture Zahak stepped. Where trust had stood for centuries, fear now dug its roots. Where order had hummed quietly, chaos took its seat upon the throne. The myths repeat this contrast again and again. Jamshid had bound people together with invention, with the balance of four groups in society, with rituals that joined them to the heavens. Zahak bound them instead by dread. His rule was not a continuation, but an inversion, the mirror image of greatness turned dark. Where Jamshid carried Khoreh, divine radiance, Zahak carried serpents, parasitic and insatiable. The throne thus became transformed before their eyes, from a seat of order into a shadow of oppression. The fate of Jamshid himself is told in many ways. Some accounts let him slip quietly from the stage, his wanderings carrying him into lands so distant his name was remembered only in whispers. Others say Zahak pursued him endlessly until he was found at the edge of the world. In these softer tellings, we hear that Jamshid met a lonely death far from his homeland, far from his crown, pursued but without the glow that once kept him safe. The myth avoids details of violence, offering instead the image of a man emptied of radiance, ending not with triumph, but with distance and sorrow. That passing marked the full arrival of Zahak's rule. His kingdom was remembered as an age of darkness, unlike anything before it. The serpents on his shoulders became more than description. They grew into symbols of endless hunger, of cravings that could never be satisfied. They demanded to be fed not with ordinary food, but with the lifeblood of the people themselves. Each day required new sacrifices, leaving terror woven into the rhythm of existence. Fear itself had become the means of governance. It is striking to compare the two kings' legacies. Jamshid's era was remembered for gift-giving, houses of brick, plows for the field, music and medicine, the table of haft scene. Zahak's era, in contrast, was remembered for draining rather than giving, exacting life to sustain his throne, turning people into fuel for his reign. Where Jamshid's gifts multiplied across generations, Zahak's presence consumed the present moment, always reaching for more, never producing new creation. The cycle of the story is clear. When pride stole humility from Jamshid, his light departed. Without that radiance, society began to fracture, and Zahak filled the opening. Myth suggests this was not random fate, but a pattern. When order fails in arrogance, shadow rises to replace it. The serpent-shouldered king could not have risen if the far still rested with Jamshid. His ascent was the scar left behind when divine favor withdrew. Yet even as the shadow fell across the land, the myths never let go of memory. Though Jamshid had wandered and perished far from home, he had left behind more than inventions. He had left symbols and rituals that survived him. Nowruz still returned each spring. Families still set their tables with sprouted greens, sweet pudding, vinegar, fruit, and garlic. Fires still lit the nights, small mirrors of the sun returning in its season. Even when Zahak commanded bodies with fear, the endurance of these acts kept alive the name of light. Renewal whispered through every year's return. This endurance carries its own lesson. Thrones may fall, radiance may abandon a king, and fear may fill places once held by harmony. Yet communities carry strength not only through rulers, but through stories, through repeated acts of balance, and through rituals of memory. In these, tyrants cannot wholly erase what came before. Zahak's shadow ruled the crown, but not the deeper rhythm of the people's lives. They continued to remember a time without sorrow, waiting for its lessons and its promise to be needed again. So the myth holds two truths at once. Pride led to the fall of Jamshid, and Zahak rose cruelly in the space that pride created. A radiant age collapsed into one of fear, Yet the light of memory remained hid within homes and firesides. The tables of Nowruz were still set. The songs of spring were still sung. The endurance of those rituals helped people carry forward what Jamshid's pride had lost. The throne could no longer bear his light, but his presence lingered softly in custom, in story, and in rebirth. And this is where the story rests for a moment. Between radiance lost and shadow enthroned, it raises the quiet question of why a fallen king continues to shape the rituals of renewal, why his name still moves through poems and ruins, why his image persists not only as brilliance, but also as warning. Yet even under Zahak, the rituals and memory endured. Why does a fallen king remain present in stories of spring and in the silence of carved ruins? You may wonder why a figure remembered for both brilliance and pride lingers long after his passing. Yet Jamshid's memory does not vanish with time. It settles not in armies or dynasties, but in the rituals people still practice, in the poetry carried from one century to the next, and in the stones that rise at Persepolis. Though historians agree those terraces and palaces were built much later under the Achaemenid kings, legend long held them as the throne of Jamshid. For those who visited across centuries, the ruins carried weight not just of stone, but of story. To walk those great staircases was to feel the imagined presence of the king who once held the far, his radiance folded into walls weathered but still standing with dignity. Memory needs places to dwell, and Persepolis became the throne of myth. In another image, his presence lingers as the Jami Jam, the cup of Jamshid. No museum holds such an object, yet in verse it shines clearly. Poets wrote of a vessel smooth as still water, but within it swirled both the past and the yet to come. They called it a mirror of the cosmos. In their lines, the cup was not a possession, but a metaphor, a reminder of vision and its limits. Some verses saw it as the gift of knowledge, others as a temptation that no ruler could bear without cost. To imagine such a cup is to imagine a bowl filled not with wine or water, but with the stars themselves, turning slowly across the surface. With these two echoes, the ruins of Persepolis and the cup in poetry, Jamshid lives on both as origin and as caution. As origin, his story ties him to the order of society, the craft of brickwork, the art of metal, and the cycle of Nowruz. Each spring, when tablecloths are laid with greens, fruit, and flame, his name stirs quietly, reminding us that human life can be bound to renewal through ritual. As caution, he remains the ruler who let pride overwhelm humility. When he demanded divine tribute as his own, the far vanished, and with it the trust of his people. His downfall shadows every retelling, a reminder that power is lost when humility leaves. These two layers, gift and warning, travel side by side within the myth. If you pause here and think of Jamshid, you may see him not as an unreachable figure, but as one whose story still rests in your own life. A staircase that leads upward, but is worn smooth, showing passage of time. A cup that seems to hold more than its shape, reflecting both your face and distant stars. An old ritual carried out each spring, where the simple act of placing sprouted greens on the table ties you quietly to the memory of his reign. His story reaches not through conquest, but through these images, familiar yet touched by myth, lasting longer than centuries of rule. Later poets made his name a tool for reflection. Some wrote of him as the measure of kingship, the radiant one who showed what it meant to govern well, to bind people with light rather than fear. Others remembered him as a figure undone by his own voice, his pride offered as warning more than praise. In both roles, he served as mirror. For rulers, He offered a model to aspire to or a path to avoid. For mystics, he became the soul who saw the stars in a cup, but not the fault within himself. In this way, Jamshid's legacy offered two mirrors at once, each equally enduring. That duality may be why his story has not dissolved. A flawless king would seem distant, untouchable, too far to belong to our memory. A king remembered only for failure would have been discarded. But Jamshid held both light and shadow, and it is in that balance that his figure remains useful. His name carries the lesson that progress is real, but fragile. That celebration is necessary, but incomplete without vigilance. His myth reminds us that every spring carries its own risk of arrogance, even as it brings renewal. So when families gather for Nowruz, even if no one speaks his name, the story lingers beneath the rhythm of custom, the laying of fruit, the sprouting of greens, the flame of a candle. Each gesture carries a thread back to the age people called without sorrow. In every act of renewal rests the echo of a time when human life seemed aligned with the calm of the cosmos. And in each sip of wine, each song played, a warning rests gently, that any golden age depends not only on gifts, but on guarding humility. Close your eyes and hold one last image before leaving him. Imagine climbing a carved staircase beneath a quiet sky. Around you stand columns eroded yet upright, pointing upward toward stars. In your hands you lift a cup, and in its surface the lights above shimmer against your reflection. Two truths wait in that surface: the brilliance of a king's vision and the shadow of his pride. That is the echo of Jamshid. Not a monument fixed in place, but a story always reminding both at once. Perhaps you find a quiet comfort in that balance tonight. If this myth, told softly, gave you a moment of peace, and you might consider leaving a like or even a gentle comment below. In doing so, you continue the rhythm of story sharing, one of the oldest acts of keeping memory alive. Let us pause here with this final reflection. The ruins staircase and the poet's cup both remind us that memory lasts even when empires end. And it is from this quiet point that we turn toward closing thoughts. Thoughts that will ask what it means when light fades, and what we must hold so it does not vanish again. Even the brightest rain fades when pride rises above humility. Jamshid's story reminds us that greatness rests on borrowed light, and when that truth is forgotten, the gift departs. His fall became the lesson that brilliance without balance cannot endure. Yet his memory also carries comfort. In Persian tradition, Nowruz became linked to his radiance, and each spring still returns with that echo of renewal. It tells us that while shadows remain, light always finds its way back. If you found this calming, you may choose to subscribe for more quiet myths. Let the story settle like a warm light as you drift.